Hey, welcome, and thank you for joining me for part 2 of episode 15 of my series, The Strange and Unexplained Phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, Kaiser Rebel, and I am telling Susan's story. The topic is the black-eyed children, and the encounter that I'm sharing with you was the encounter of Susan, and that's an assumed name, not her real name. And this encounter was shared with me after she passed away. And it was her best friend, and he described himself as her lifelong partner. And I asked him why, and he said he felt that it was time to share her story with the world. But she had developed the habit of traveling back and forth from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to her childhood home, and that she had found a time of peace and tranquility in her life, and found comfort, and felt when she came to her childhood home on the weekends to visit, she found that she felt closer to her departed parents. She had developed the habit of sitting on the back porch, the black screen-in porch, on those late summer afternoons into the evening time, reading, sipping coffee, thinking, peering off into the distance at the silhouette of the mountains. And then there was the encounter, and her whole life changed. She had been sitting there reading, with the reading lamp on. Sun had just began to set below the western horizon behind her, and she saw the shadows growing longer. She saw 4 silhouettes emerge from the woods downhill in her backyard, and it turned out to be 4 children. There was one spokesman in the group, spokesperson, appeared to be a 12, 13-year-old boy, and he called her by name and said, "Miss Susan, you must help us. Miss Susan, we need you." And she was stunned. How do these children know my name? Where are these children coming from? What's going on? But she just suddenly became overwhelmed by an unexplained fear as she was reaching for the very latch to open that door to greet these children that were coming to her out of the ever-darkening backyard of her childhood home. And she moved her hand down, and she doesn't know why she made any of the decisions she made that night, but she suddenly lowered her hand and she did not unlatch it. She finally said, "What can I do to help you?" And this boy, in an otherworldly voice that chilled her blood, said, "We need to come in. Will you allow us entry?" She found that to be odd words to be coming from a kid that was 12 or 13 years old. And she said, "Do you need me to call your parents? You need me to call the police?" And oddly enough, this male child said, "Susan, we do not need the sheriff. You are able to help us. Let us come in." And by then, these 4 children are at the very base of the back steps coming to that porch. And the first visual detail she noticed was the odd dress of the children. Older dress from an older time, and the one female child of the group wearing strange looking oversized baggy overalls with a gray colored shirt but had floral designs on it. And it was when the children looked up at her to make eye contact that she saw the thing that haunted her till the very day she died. As they looked up, she said that all she saw was soulless black eyes, almost as if they didn't have any eyes at all, but just black holes where their eyes should be. She said every fiber of her being said, "Run." Every fiber of her being screamed, "Danger." And in the conversation, she felt she would on and off again feel stunned, unable to move, not sure what to do. She finally summoned up the strength to say, "No, children, you stay there. I'm calling the sheriff." And all went quiet. The children just stared at her, and she was fixated on their eyes. And then the female of the group, the one with the oversized baggy overalls, hung her head downward as though she was going to look at the ground, but then seemed to have started sobbing, and her shoulders were heaving, and her head was bouncing up and down a little bit. And she finally put her face in her hands. But just as Susan was about to be moved with pity and compassion, it became evident that this little girl was not sobbing, but rather she was laughing and giggling in such a way that Susan felt the hairs on the back of her neck standing up, and she just wanted to run away but couldn't. And then something happened that horrified Susan and stayed in her nightmares until the very day that she died. This female child stopped everything and suddenly looked back up at her. And her mouth was moving, but out of her mouth, Susan heard her deceased mother's voice saying, "Susan, let these children have shelter. Susan, do it. Susan, do it." It was another time Susan just felt like she was completely helpless. But somehow, she managed to scream, "Leave now. Leave now." And she was getting ready to turn away and walk back into the house. And the oldest boy said, "Your mother wouldn't help us either. But you do not know what she knew, Susan." And then these four entities, these four black-eyed children, turned in unison and began to walk away back toward the woods, into the darkness, and disappeared altogether. Susan, at that very moment, she didn't call the police. She didn't do anything. She gathered a few things, her overnight bag and her keys and her purse, and she left and drove non-stop back to Chapel Hill. She woke up her best friend, her lifelong partner, Dave, and shared with him what had happened. And then the next day, she talked more about it and described it more in detail. And Dave pitched the idea of speaking with Susan's mother's best friend, who we're going to call Gwen. And so that next weekend, they drove back. But they did not stay in Susan's childhood home. They got a motel. And they met with Gwen and had coffee, and she described to Gwen what happened. Gwen didn't appear shocked. She didn't appear surprised. But she said, "Susan, after your father died, the very same thing happened to your mother. Same scenario. They appeared out of those woods. Your mother saw them coming through the backyard as she stood at the kitchen window doing her evening dishes. And she said, Susan, your mother didn't have very little conversation with him because she said that she felt immediately that she was dealing with demonic entities. She invoked the name of Jesus and ordered them to leave. And they did indeed leave. But Gwen said, I know a little bit about this, and I know they come at people when they're vulnerable, when they're grieving, when they're having tough times in their life. They came for your mother when your father died, and they came for you when your mother died. And Gwen said, we'll talk more about it later if you decide to move back here. Susan and Dave went back to Chapel Hill, and then the next weekend came back, and by then Susan had made her decision. They cleaned the house out, and the house sat empty for years. Dave said Susan was never the same after that. He tried to get her to go to counseling. He tried to go get her to go seek the help of a preacher, but she wouldn't do anything. After a few months, Susan simply refused to talk about it whatsoever in any way, shape, or form with Dave or Gwen or anyone else. She passed away a few years later in her sleep at a young age, and Dave asked me not to share the circumstances of her passing, and I will certainly honor that. But Dave said that he felt, although he wasn't there, hearing her story and seeing the fear in her eyes, and hearing the anxiety in her voice and the panic in her voice as she told the story to him several times, that it tortured her and that it tortured him. So with that, I'll say, I pray that none of you ever have to deal with anything like that whatsoever. And if you have any encounters like that you would like to share, please contact me. I would love to hear it. If you want me to share it, I'll share it. I appreciate you all so very much, and God bless you.